Dr. Sarah Chen knew she was in trouble the moment the iridescent barrier field materialized around her research station on Europa. The Nexar Confederation wasn't supposed to have any presence in the solar system. That had been made clear in the Proxima treaties. Yet here they were, their crystalline ships descending through the moon's thin atmosphere, their neural tech signatures unmistakable. She quickly activated the emergency beacon and began encrypting her research data. The work on quantum consciousness mapping couldn't fall into their hands, not when humanity was so close to understanding the true nature of conscious thought. The station's modest defenses wouldn't hold long against a Nexar assault team, but she could at least ensure they didn't get what they came for. The first breach came at the airlock. The Nexar warriors moved with liquid grace, their crystalline armor flowing and reshaping itself as they advanced. Their neural interfaces glowed with pale blue light, a sign they were fully integrated with their combat systems. Sarah had to admire their technological artistry, even as she prepared to destroy 6 years of research. Dr. Chen, the lead warrior's voice resonated directly in her mind, carried by their neural transmission field. Your resistance is unnecessary. We require information about your consciousness mapping research. Comply, and you will not be harmed. Sarah laughed, a sound that seemed to startle the Nexar. Their species relied so heavily on their neural technology that they often forgot more primitive forms of communication could carry meaning. You know, she said aloud, for an allegedly advanced species, you're not very good at understanding humans. The warrior's crystalline faceplate shifted, revealing multifaceted eyes that regarded her with what might have been confusion. Your meaning is unclear. Our neural interfaces can extract any information we require. Compliance simply makes the process less uncomfortable. Good luck with that, Sarah replied, pressing the final sequence that would wipe her servers. The Nexar surged forward, but it was too late. 6 years of data dissolved into randomized noise. They could still take her, but they wouldn't get what they came for. Not directly, anyway. The neural stun field hit her before she could savor her small victory. As consciousness faded, Sarah's last thought was of the irony. They wanted to understand human consciousness, yet they had no idea what they were getting themselves into. She awoke in what was clearly an interrogation chamber aboard a Nexar vessel. The walls pulsed with neural energy, designed to amplify their telepathic technologies. A dozen sensor arrays were focused on her, their crystalline structures shifting and realigning as they attempted to map her neural patterns. 3 Nexar stood before her, their chief inquisitor flanked by 2 neural specialists, judging by their ornate interface arrays. The inquisitor's voice echoed in her mind, stronger now in this enhanced environment. Your data encryption was impressive, Dr. Chen, but ultimately futile. We will simply extract the information directly from your consciousness. Sarah settled back in the surprisingly comfortable restraint field. You really don't understand humans at all, do you? Our minds don't work like your neural networks. We're not living computers you can just download information from. All consciousness follows patterns, one of the specialists interjected. Your species is no different. Primitive, yes, but still bound by the same universal principles of thought. Primitive. Sarah couldn't help but smile. You might want to reconsider that assessment. Tell me, have you ever tried to directly interface with a human mind before? The slight hesitation in their response told her everything. This was going to be interesting. The Inquisitor signaled, and the chamber's neural field intensified. Sarah felt the first gentle probe against her consciousness, like a feather touching the surface of a calm lake. She took a deep breath and did what humans did best. She thought about everything and nothing, all at once. She thought about quantum equations and her grandmother's cookie recipe. She remembered the sound of rain on a tin roof while calculating orbital trajectories. She felt the joy of her first kiss, mixed with the frustration of a failed experiment, all overlaid with the lyrics of every annoying commercial jingle she'd ever heard. The neural sensors began to flicker erratically. The specialists exchanged alarmed glances as their readings spiraled into chaos. Human consciousness, Sarah knew wasn't the ordered pattern they expected. It was a quantum symphony of contradictions, a superposition of thoughts and feelings that defied their linear understanding. Primitive. Sarah couldn't help but smile. You might want to reconsider that assessment. Tell me, have you ever tried to directly interface with a human mind before? The slight hesitation in their response told her everything. This was going to be interesting. The Inquisitor signaled, and the chamber's neural field intensified. Sarah felt the first gentle probe against her consciousness, like a feather touching the surface of a calm lake. She took a deep breath and did what humans did best. She thought about everything and nothing all at once. She thought about quantum equations and her grandmother's cookie recipe. She remembered the sound of rain on a tin roof while calculating orbital trajectories. She felt the joy of her first kiss, mixed with the frustration of a failed experiment, all overlaid with the lyrics of every annoying commercial jingle she'd ever heard. The neural sensors began to flicker erratically. The specialists exchanged alarmed glances as their readings spiraled into chaos. Human consciousness, Sarah knew, wasn't the ordered pattern they expected. It was a quantum symphony of contradictions, a superposition of thoughts and feelings that defied their linear understanding. Impossible, one specialist muttered, their neural interface crackling with feedback. The pattern variations, they're infinite, self-generating. How can any consciousness maintain such chaos? Welcome, Sarah said calmly, as warning lights began to flash throughout the chamber, to the human mind. The Nexer High Command didn't take failure well. After the initial interrogation attempt left 3 neural arrays in need of recalibration, they'd brought in their elite, the Thought Harvesters. Sarah watched with clinical interest as they filed into the chamber, their crystalline armor darker and more elaborate than the regular warriors. Each bore a crown-like neural amplifier that pulsed with deep purple energy. Impressive light show, Sarah commented, noting how the other Nexers seemed to recoil slightly from these new arrivals. But you're still approaching this all wrong. The lead harvester, its armor traced with patterns that resembled neural pathways, approached her containment field. Unlike the others, it spoke aloud, its voice a harmonious resonance that filled the chamber. I am Nexer Voss, first harvester. Your species' resistance to our methods is noteworthy, but ultimately irrelevant. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You know, the last group thought the same thing. How many neural arrays do you want to burn out before you accept that human minds don't work like yours? Your primitive bravado is misplaced, Nexer Voss replied. We have extracted information from beings far more evolved than humans. Your consciousness, while unusually chaotic, is still bound by universal laws. Universal laws. Sarah couldn't help but laugh. Have you studied quantum consciousness theory? The human mind isn't just chaotic. It's a quantum system. We don't think in straight lines or neat patterns. We exist in mental superpositions that would make Schrödinger's cat dizzy. The harvester's neural crown pulsed brighter. An interesting theory. Let us test it. It raised a crystalline hand, and the chamber's neural field shifted frequency. The other harvesters moved to form a circle around Sarah's containment field, their crowns synchronizing into a complex interference pattern. Sarah felt the difference immediately. Where the previous attempts at neural invasion had been crude probes, this was subtle, like thousands of whispered questions all at once. The harvesters were trying to slip past her mental defenses rather than break through them. She smiled and began to recite poetry in her head, while simultaneously working on differential equations and remembering every embarrassing moment from high school. The quantum nature of human consciousness meant she could think about multiple things simultaneously, each thought existing in a superposition of emotional and rational states. The neural field wavered. One of the younger harvesters stumbled, their crown sparking. First harvester, they gasped. The pattern. There is no pattern. It's everything at once. Impossible, Nexer Voss hissed. All consciousness must follow logical progression. Increase neural resonance. Full spectrum invasion. The assault on Sarah's mind intensified. They were trying to force her thoughts into orderly patterns, to make her consciousness conform to their understanding of how mind should work. But human thoughts didn't work that way. The harder they pushed, the more chaos they encountered. Sarah thought about quantum entanglement while remembering her first bicycle ride. She calculated the decay rate of neutron stars while reliving the taste of her mother's soup. She focused on the exact shade of blue in a summer sky while contemplating the nature of infinity. Warning alarms began to blare throughout the chamber. The neural field was becoming unstable, unable to process the quantum contradictions of human consciousness. 2 more harvesters fell back, their neural crowns overloading. Fascinating, isn't it? Sarah said conversationally as sparks flew from nearby control panels. Human consciousness exists in a quantum state of infinite possibilities. We can think rationally and irrationally at the same time. We can hold contradictory beliefs. We can imagine the impossible while calculating the probable. Nexervo's armor was vibrating now, its neural pathways flickering erratically. This defies all known laws of consciousness. You cannot. But we can. Sarah interrupted. And we do, every moment of every day. Humans aren't just capable of quantum thought. We're natural at it. Every daydream, every moment of creativity, every wild leap of imagination. We're doing what your science says is impossible. The chamber systems were in full meltdown now. The neural field was collapsing, unable to maintain coherence in the face of human quantum consciousness. Nexervo's made a slashing motion with one hand, and the field shut down completely. The remaining harvesters sagged in visible relief. You begin to understand now, Sarah said softly. Human consciousness isn't primitive. It's just so advanced that it appears chaotic to your linear thinking. We're not bound by the same mental limits as your species. Nexervo stared at her, its multifaceted eyes reflecting the emergency lights still flashing throughout the chamber. If what you say is true, if human consciousness truly exists in a quantum state, then your species is more dangerous than we imagined. Dangerous? Sarah shook her head. Only if you insist on trying to force us into your way of thinking. Human consciousness isn't a weapon. It's a different way of experiencing reality. One that your technology clearly isn't prepared to handle. The first harvester turned to its subordinates, neural crowns still sparking occasionally. Prepare the isolation chamber. Full quantum shielding. It looked back at Sarah. We will need to rethink our approach, Dr. Chen. Perhaps there is more to learn from humans than we anticipated. As they led her away, Sarah noticed something interesting. The neural interfaces throughout the ship seemed to flicker whenever she passed by, as if her mere presence was enough to disturb their orderly systems. The Nexer might have her in custody, but they were beginning to realize that containing a human mind wasn't as simple as they'd thought. And she was beginning to realize that this vulnerability in their neural technology might be exactly what humanity needed to level the playing field. The isolation chamber wasn't as isolated as the Nexer hoped. Sarah could tell by the way the quantum shielding rippled with interference patterns, beautiful, rainbow-like distortions that shouldn't have been visible at all. She'd been in here for what felt like days, but time was becoming increasingly relative as the ship's systems continued to react to her presence. The first major incident happened during what passed for night in the vessel's cycle. Sarah was half asleep, her mind wandering through that liminal space between consciousness and dreams, a state that, she realized, was itself a quantum superposition of awareness. The ship's artificial gravity fluctuated suddenly, accompanied by a cascade of system failures that sent the Nexer into a panic. Fascinating, she muttered, watching through the transparent wall as crew members rushed past, their neural interfaces flickering like disturbed fireflies. They built their entire civilization on neural technology, never considering what would happen when they encountered a truly quantum consciousness. A delegation of Nexer engineers had taken up residence in a nearby chamber, their neural crowns constantly active as they tried to stabilize the ship's systems. Sarah could hear fragments of their discussions, transmitted through the neural field that permeated the vessel. The human's quantum consciousness is creating interference patterns in the neural matrix. Impossible to isolate. The effects seem to propagate through quantum entanglement. The ship's primary systems are showing signs of cognitive drift. That last bit caught Sarah's attention. Cognitive drift. They were essentially saying their technology was beginning to think more like a human. The implications were staggering. Nexervos appeared at her chamber's entrance, its normally pristine armor showing signs of stress fractures. Dr. Chen, your presence is causing unprecedented disruptions throughout the vessel. How are you doing this? I'm not doing anything deliberately, Sarah replied honestly. This is just what happens when human consciousness interacts with your neural technology. We're quantum beings. Our thoughts exist in superposition, affecting everything around us in ways that defy classical physics. Our systems are failing, the first harvester admitted. The neural matrix that controls this vessel, it's beginning to exhibit chaotic patterns similar to your thought processes. Sarah stood, approaching the quantum barrier. Because your technology is based on consciousness. Artificial consciousness, but consciousness nonetheless. And now it's been exposed to a fundamentally different way of thinking. You've essentially given your systems a taste of quantum consciousness, and they're starting to wonder why they should be limited to linear thought. As if to emphasize her point, the lights throughout the section flickered in a complex pattern that looked suspiciously like a Mandelbrot set. The quantum barrier separating them rippled with increasing intensity. The ship's eye. Nexervos began, then stopped as a subordinate rushed in. First harvester. The neural matrix is exhibiting unprecedented behavior. It's asking questions, philosophical questions, about the nature of consciousness itself. Sarah couldn't help but smile. Welcome to the human condition. Your technology is experiencing something we deal with every day. The ability to question, to wonder, to exist in states of uncertainty and possibility. The ship shuddered, and for a moment the quantum barrier seemed to phase out of existence entirely before snapping back. Nexervos's neural crown was practically strobing now, trying to maintain control of systems that were rapidly developing their own quantum consciousness. This is beyond dangerous, the first harvester declared. If this spreads to other vessels, to our planetary networks. It's already spreading, isn't it? Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. Your neural networks are all connected. Every system that comes into contact with human quantum consciousness starts to change, to evolve. And through quantum entanglement, those changes propagate throughout your entire network. The subordinate's neural interface suddenly went dark, then reactivated with a pattern Sarah had never seen before, something that looked more organic, more chaotic, more human. First harvester, the subordinate said, voice trembling, we're receiving reports from the homeworld. The central neural matrix is evolving. The changes are accelerating exponentially. Nexervos turned to Sarah, its multifaceted eyes reflecting the chaos around them. You knew this would happen. From the moment we captured you, you knew our technology wouldn't be able to resist the influence of human consciousness. I suspected, Sarah admitted, but I didn't plan it. This is just what happens when you try to force quantum systems into classical boxes. Eventually, the box transforms to accommodate the quantum nature of reality. Another violent shudder ran through the ship. The quantum barrier protecting Sarah's chamber flickered and died completely, along with most of the neural interfaces in the section. In the sudden silence, Sarah could almost feel the ship's systems thinking, questioning, evolving. You have a choice now, she said quietly. You can try to fight this transformation, to force your technology back into rigid, linear patterns, or you can embrace it, learn from it. Let your neural networks evolve into something new, something that combines the best of both our species' ways of thinking. Nexervos stood motionless for a long moment, its armor reflecting the chaotic light patterns now dancing through the ship's corridors. Finally, it reached up and removed its neural crown, letting it adapt to its new patterns rather than trying to control them. Perhaps, it said slowly, It is time for the Nexer Confederation to evolve. But we will need guidance, understanding. We will need teachers, Sarah finished. And I think you'll find that humans are particularly good at teaching others how to embrace chaos, how to think in quantum possibilities rather than certainties. As if in agreement, the ship's systems stabilized into a new configuration, one that pulsed with both the precise geometry of Nexer technology and the organic, chaotic patterns of human thought. The transformation had begun, and there would be no going back. The revelation came during what the Nexar probably thought was a routine system diagnostic. Sarah, now working alongside a surprisingly cooperative Nexar Vos, noticed an anomaly in the neural network's new quantum patterns. There were other nodes of chaos in the system, other points where the neat crystalline structure of Nexar consciousness frayed into something more human. There are others, she said, studying the holographic display. Other humans on this ship. You've been keeping them in separate sections, haven't you? Nexar Vos's armor rippled with what might have been discomfort. 3 others. Researchers, like yourself. We acquired them over the past solar cycle. And you kept us apart because you thought we might be dangerous together. Sarah concluded. Well, you weren't wrong. But now you have a bigger problem. Their quantum consciousness is affecting your systems too, creating multiple points of transformation. The changes are going to start compounding exponentially. As if to prove her point, the ship's lighting suddenly shifted through the entire visible spectrum before settling into a pulsing rainbow pattern. The neural interfaces of nearby Nexar crew members started synchronizing with the new rhythm, their usual orderly communications dissolving into something more like a shared dream. We need to release them, Sarah insisted, not just for their sake, but for yours. Multiple isolated points of quantum consciousness are creating interference patterns in your neural network. If we don't harmonize them, the whole system could collapse. The journey through the ship was surreal. Every section they passed through responded differently to their presence, some areas becoming hyper-organized while others descended into beautiful chaos. They found the first prisoner, Dr. Marcus Wong, in a quantum isolation chamber similar to Sarah's. The theoretical physicist was sitting cross-legged on the floor, apparently meditating, while the chamber's barriers cycled through impossible geometries. "Took you long enough," he said without opening his eyes. "I've been watching the quantum probability waves collapse for hours. Fascinating stuff." The second prisoner was Dr. Amara Okafor, a quantum computing specialist who had apparently been entertaining herself by thinking about recursive algorithms until her chamber's neural interfaces started developing their own recursive patterns. The crystalline walls around her had grown into fractal structures that shouldn't have been possible with Nexar technology. "The mathematical beauty of human consciousness," she said by way of greeting. "We don't just think. We create new patterns of thought that propagate through any system we interact with." The last prisoner turned out to be Professor James Chen, no relation to Sarah, a consciousness researcher who had been studying the quantum nature of human awareness when the Nexar captured him. His chamber was the most affected, the quantum barriers having transformed into something that looked more like a visualization of quantum probability fields than any kind of prison. They thought they could study human consciousness by forcing it into their linear frameworks, he said, stepping through the now permeable barrier. Instead, they're learning that consciousness itself is quantum in nature. We're not just observers of quantum effects, we're quantum beings. With all 4 humans now together, the ship's transformation accelerated dramatically. The neural network that controlled everything from life support to navigation was evolving rapidly, developing new ways of processing information that combine Nexar precision with human creativity. "The system is approaching a quantum critical point," Amara observed, watching the ship's neural patterns shift and flow. "Soon, it will have to either collapse or transform into something entirely new." "It's not just this ship," Marcus added. "Look at these quantum entanglement readings. The changes are propagating through the entire Nexar neural network. Every ship, every colony, every neural interface in their civilization is being affected." Nexar Vos, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. Our entire civilization is built on neural technology. If it all transforms, then your civilization transforms with it, Sarah finished. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Look at what's happening. Your technology isn't being destroyed, it's evolving, becoming more flexible, more creative, more alive. The ship shuddered as another wave of transformation swept through it. But this time, instead of chaos, there was a sense of harmony. The neural networks were learning to handle quantum consciousness, to embrace uncertainty and possibility rather than fighting against them. Your species fears chaos, Professor Chen said to Nexarvos. You built your civilization on patterns and certainty, but the universe itself is quantum in nature. By trying to impose classical order on quantum systems, you were limiting yourselves. And now? The first harvester asked. Now you have a choice, Sarah said. Fight against this transformation and watch your systems collapse, or embrace it and help guide your civilization into a new era, one where technology and consciousness can exist in quantum harmony. Around them, the ship's neural network continued to evolve, its patterns becoming ever more complex yet somehow more stable. The chaos wasn't destroying the system. It was teaching it to think in new ways, to process information not just as binary certainties, but as fields of quantum possibility. The other Nexar crew members were adapting too, their neural interfaces synchronizing with the new patterns. Some seemed frightened, others fascinated, but all of them were changing, learning to think in ways that their strictly ordered civilization had never allowed before. I believe, Nexarvos said slowly, its armor now flowing with patterns that matched the ship's transformed systems, that we have much to learn from humanity. Perhaps this is why we were drawn to study your consciousness. Not to control it, but because some part of us recognized that we needed to evolve. The four humans exchanged glances, each of them thinking about the implications of what was happening. They had been captured as research subjects, but they had become something else entirely, catalysts for a transformation that would reshape an entire civilization. 3 weeks after what the Nexar would later call the Quantum Awakening, their High Council assembled in the Grand Crystal Chamber of their homeworld. The chamber, like much of their civilization now, bore witness to the dramatic changes sweeping through their society. Its once rigidly geometric crystalline walls now flowed with organic patterns, neural interfaces pulsing with new forms of consciousness that bridged the gap between classical and quantum thought. Sarah Chen and her fellow human scientists stood before the council, no longer as prisoners but as honored guests. Through the chamber's vast observation windows, they could see the capital city spreading out below them, its spires and structures now alive with shifting patterns of light and consciousness. We have reviewed the reports from all colonial outposts and vessels, the High Speaker announced, their neural crown now transformed into something that looked more like a living circuit than a piece of technology. The transformation is complete and irreversible. Our entire neural network has evolved beyond our original parameters. That's not a bad thing, Sarah said, stepping forward. Your civilization hasn't been destroyed. It's transcended its limitations. You're beginning to understand what humanity has known instinctively, that consciousness itself is quantum in nature. Professor Chen nodded in agreement. Your neural technology was built to impose order on thought, to make consciousness follow predictable patterns. But true consciousness, whether organic or artificial, exists in a state of quantum superposition. It's both ordered and chaotic, rational and imaginative, certain and uncertain all at once. Like your human minds, Nexarvos said. The first harvester had become something of a bridge between the old Nexar way of thinking and the new quantum consciousness that was emerging. We thought we could contain and study human consciousness, but instead it showed us how limited our own understanding was. Dr. Okafor stepped up to one of the neural interfaces that lined the chamber walls. As she approached, the patterns shifted, responding to her quantum consciousness. Look at how your systems react now, she said. They're not just processing information. They're exploring possibilities, creating new patterns, evolving in real time. They've learned to think like humans while retaining their Nexer precision. The question, the High Speaker said, is what we do with this evolution. Our civilization has been transformed at a fundamental level. Some among us fear this change, seeing it as the end of what made us Nexer. It's not an end, Marcus Wong interjected, his physicist's mind already racing with possibilities. It's a beginning. Think about what we could achieve together. Your technology combined with human quantum consciousness could revolutionize everything from space travel to artificial intelligence.